It's the state of the dungeon. It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello friends, I am Rob and this is my State of the Dungeon address. This is for the game that took place on the 14th of April. The game was 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons in the GUI Cube. Running to the end of the Foulest of Spirits Part 2 in the Red Star Rising campaign. All players were in attendance, including remotely, we had the player of Kenna. So 7 people. It was a full group. So, the group at this point is preparing for the assault on the Butcher's farm. At this point, they've already run afoul of some of the loathsome creatures outside the farm. A group of hog skeeters had a bit of a conflict. And then they ran afoul of one of the people who lives outside of the house, Filthy Floyd, who actually lives under the outhouse. Yeah. And had a skirmish with Floyd already, causing many in the group to become nauseated. And it also meant that they were starting out kind of in a bad space as Floyd was forced to flee. Unfortunately, there was somebody who was slinging at them from a distance, and he had already knocked out Vanessa and had hit Ventov. So they were aware that he was there. To counter this, Glyn slipped off from the rest of the group to go and hunt down the attacker. And he was having the darndest time. His luck was not going well. At this time, however, they had successfully driven off Filthy Floyd back into the outhouse, largely on the strength of a couple of beautiful shots of the arrow from Glyn, who was still in support of the group, before he went off to their unseen assailant, who they were all pretty sure was that kid that they had seen fishing on the trail up, Little Doofer. So, this is where the game started. Ventov had thrown his oil of slipperiness onto the porch and was now using the wood pile in front of the house as cover from outside, from against the slinger. At this point, Crendon had bypassed the miasma around Floyd and had made demands on the Butchers inside, smashing out one of their windows and calling into them, telling them they were going to burn their house down, and that they had already taken care of Filthy Floyd and Little Doofer. And the folk inside told them, well, you can burn the house down. We'll still be fine. You'll kill this lawman here who's with us, as well as whatever else you might have come here for. Because at this point, they didn't believe that the group was actually there to eradicate them. They figured there was some other reason they were there. So, at this point, the group also had to, kind of remind themselves that while burning it down is an attractive option, it might get them out of a whole bunch of annoyances. The precious goods they were coming for, Mother Sylvence's wares, might be in that house and might be destroyed if they do that. So, arson is probably not the answer they need at this point. So they prepared to go in. At this point, Glyn is still stalking, and he's not having any luck until a chance shot plinks off of his armor. His assailant is not having any luck hitting him. And he finally gets within eyeball distance of his quarry. It is Little Doofer. The little sucker had moved up and was slinging at the people who were attacking his home. He actually is a butcher. And at this point, it got real. Glyn versus Doofer on paper almost didn't seem fair. Obviously, the party is inflated a bit, but Little Doofer's pretty skilled at the roguing stuff. The problem is when Rogue is caught flat-footed, they're in trouble. And he didn't have any delusions that he was going to actually be able to take Glynn, except that Glynn himself wasn't really at 100% either. So he thought he might have a shot. So they did engage in a little short sword to short sword combat. Glynn with his Sarek Iron Sword. Turns out the little guy's pretty good with his short sword. And actually Glynn takes a pretty nasty cut from Doofer. But in the end, Glynn is quicker. And he has he's a little hardier. And he ends up nailing little Doofer pretty hard. Which causes him to try to run away. Figuring he knows the terrain. He'd been enjoying advantage the whole time for being in home territory and having set up the ground in advance so he could dive into bolt holes and hide. That did mean that he turned his back on Glynn one time too many, and Glynn ended him with an arrow right into his backside. Pretty harsh stuff, but ultimately necessary if Glynn was going to be able to return back to the group and help them out. So at this point, the group realizes that the butchers are no longer in the main room of their home. They have withdrawn for whatever nefarious purposes, so they prepare to enter. At first, it's a little complicated because, it's a window. It's broken glass and stuff, and, they really haven't, peeled off the glass or, done anything to make the entry a little more convenient. And it also turns out that it's not a really complicated thing to lift yourself up the window and pull yourself in. But the dice are not with the group. They almost got held off by the fact that the window is up a little bit higher. As you do to make sure, wild animals don't get into your home. The butchers live out in the wild. They have to worry about things like that. But in this case, all of a sudden Ventov comes rocketing and just vaults right in and ends up looking like a world-class acrobat with his skills, at the same time that Haranen seems to be having difficulty, and even the actual spell dancer, who normally should be able to make such a jump, Kenna, is having troubles. But eventually they do get into the main room, and they see a place that has been abandoned. They threw a couple of things in front of the door to make getting in a little harder, but for the most part, the people who were inside got a chance to look around and get a first view of the place, which, aside from the very creaky floorboards, didn't look anything too sinister. A taxidermied hog's head with a green bottle in its mouth up on the wall, a roaring hearth, And then the two dogs came in and attacked. Yeah, their first assault, the first offense that the butchers had was to sick the dogs on them. And this was Smelly and Clarabelle. Now, Smelly and Clarabelle are not very tough combatants, but they are vicious. And they attack with a will. They score only a single bite before they are just heartlessly chopped down by the party. They're not very tough. So a single blow from Ventov ends one, and I think Haranen scored the other. It was one-hit kills, really. The group is pretty tough. And they heard somebody from off to one side, off to the right. Sounded like they were upset that their dogs had met a messy end. And the group let the rest of the people in as best as they could and prepared to go throughout the house using, proper entry techniques. So they sidle along and they head towards the area which is the kitchen. And get prepared because they can hear noises, they can hear voices. And they get in and it's empty. The kitchen, obviously, it's been used. There's a pie sitting on the table. There's a cauldron full of food, some sort of stew. And, they're all of a sudden, can't hear anything. And don't see anybody. Nobody's lurking under the table or anything. And then they hear that there's a hole kind of in the wall with a kind of a pipe leading through, and that's where the voices were coming from. They actually had a very, 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 very crude system of communicating between the rooms with basically a voice pipe going through. So that's what they had been hearing. But then they were looking around and listening, and there's a staircase at one end of the room which leads to a shaft with a ladder at the end. They decide that because they can kind of hear something down there rustling around, they go and they get the stew pot. And Haranen and Ventov carry it over. This led to a slight discussion about making assumptions about how their characters are smart. They said they were going to just grab the stew pot and go, and I was, ready to do some very minor burns to them for grabbing a hot metal cauldron, but then they looked at me and said, our characters aren't that dumb. We would definitely use something to protect our hands, and I had to agree. Ultimately, their characters would not have willingly burned their hands senselessly. But, it is nice when, people do the thinking for their characters a little bit. Show some forethought. But, nonetheless, they brought the cauldron over and dumped it. It smashed through the stairs. The stairs were not that strong, and the cauldron full of stew was pretty darn heavy, so the stairs are now a ruin, which means that now, where the stairs were, there is a 6-7 foot drop, and then there's a pit next to it with a ladder coming out of it, and there's stew all over the floor, including a lot of it running down into the pit. No sound of anybody screaming or screeching or squealing from getting hot stew dumped all over them, so it must not really have scored much, but it did make an awful lot of clamor, which the group was waiting for something to happen, but apparently the butchers were a little bit better. They're a little calmer than to immediately have an issue with charging at them when they made such noise, which shows a little bit of planning and forethought. So the group goes back. And there are a pair of hallways leading off of one corner of the main room that lead to the other rooms of the house. They see that off in one direction, a couple doors, down the other direction, a couple doors, and then a couple doors after that. And they're like, okay. At this point, I laid out the map for them. They could see where they want to go. I had the map somewhat concealed behind some paper, so they could see the hallways, they could see where the doors were, they could make their plans on where they wanted to go. And the first place they went to was down one hallway, just picked the door and opened it. And there they met Granny. Granny, of course, the matriarch of the Butcher clan, does not seem to fit in with what they eventually find with the rest of the Butchers, in that she is a very severe-looking woman with actually, she's wearing a dress, she's sitting in a rocking chair, and she's got a double-barreled heavy crossbow, which she fires at Ventov. Now, this weapon looks pretty ferocious, and she's old. She's not strong. She's struggling to recock it. She just continues to rock in her chair, though. She's not bothered. Just saying terrible things to them and when she sees them. And nobody is really looking forward to getting in front of that crossbow. And Ventov has a real problem with hitting old women, apparently. Because as he's roaring for somebody else to come in and help him out. So, at this point, it's a matter of thinking who's going to go in. Kenna gets ready to dash up ahead and charge in at the old woman. And considering she's got her dance of displacement, so she's a harder target, and she doesn't have a problem beating this old woman. The door opposite suddenly springs open, and a pair of the Butchers rush in to try to rescue Grandma. And that would be Eustace and Jeb. They go dashing in. Now, while this is going on, the whole party has not committed to going along this hallway and getting in on this fight. Several of the members have kind of fallen back. Mostly Vanessa, who is staying back, and she's deliberately watching behind to make sure nobody comes up. This is fortuitous, because at this point, Filthy Floyd was ready to come back for a round 2, and he looked much better than the first time, or than the last time they had seen him, because while he was down there, he swigged a healing potion and got himself much better. Unfortunately for him, the group was ready for this. There was no sneak attacking, and Vanessa was just ready to fling fire into his face. And at this point, too, we had Crendon helping her out, and he slid by and got ready to help by launching also at Floyd. And Brandel, I believe, fired another blast from her wand of fading, dying embers. So all told, though Floyd had recovered, the party's rear guard took him down pretty hard. I think it was felled by a dagger, but I could be mistaken. But he went down, and he was particularly loathsome in his approach, making everybody really uncomfortable with Floyd. Floyd is troublesome. But they dropped him. On the other side, though, with Haranen and Kenna and Ventov taking on the Butchers, it was a tight, chaotic mess, because both Jeb and Eustace are used to using smaller cutters. Eustace especially has a very nasty dagger that he delighted in using. But ultimately, between Granny and Jeb and Eustace, it was not enough to take on the Hanataz front guard. And eventually Jeb drops, then Eustace, and Kenna got in there with Granny, and he even hit her with the sword, and Granny's tough. But finally she couldn't take another shot, and she finally died. So they liberated her double-barreled crossbow, and ended up looting. So they got that nice little dagger of Eustace's. They ended up getting, as I said, Granny's bow. They did a little light looting of Granny's room. Found a few nice things that she had kept. She kept some of the more valuable things in terms of actual cash value that they had as the heirlooms of their family. So, in a way, this is poetic justice, really. And the group outside rolled Filthy Floyd, which was helped by some prestidigitation spells by Crendon and Brandel. So it cut the filth down to the point where they could actually look him over. They found some stuff on him. Some of it was salvageable. Some of it was just horrible. But they looked him over, and he's got what they could, and just decided to put that all behind them and move back. And Glenn's got Doofer's body in there too, which he took back with him as well. So they go in now. The whole party to go in and concentrate on dealing with the Butchers, whoever's left. They're pretty confident there are still more of them, though. So they go back into the room that Jeb and Eustace came out of, and Ventov looks under the bed to see another Butcher with a big cleaver who is under the bed, as well as two others. In the hallway, those cleavers really would have been more of a liability than a help. So when they get into the fighting in this room, those cleavers are a lot more useful. So this ambush attack against the best armored of the lot really only results in Ventov took some damage, yes, in the sneak attacking of these Butchers. But Ventov did a smart thing. He stepped back out of the room, took a shot, but got back so that he couldn't be surrounded. And the group could leverage just as much offense as the Butchers could through the doorway. So it was offering people some cover as they were fighting, and in general, it wasn't a bad strategy at all. And that led to the conflict between the various fine folk of the Butchers, the last of the menfolk, it seems, who were to defend their family, and that was Cutter, who was a rather unpleasant person with an uncontrollable laugh, Ehab, and Hez. And they all had these big cleavers, and they were fighting like they were battle axes, and actually pretty nasty because they are a close-knit family, and when they're fighting alongside of their kin, they're actually better at fighting. So the group ended up still wiping the floor with them. Again, the experienced heroes who have some decent gear and determination on their side, and some gooey rewards were used, but ultimately the butchers were laid low. Looting the bodies and such found, all kinds of odds and ends and things like that, and checking into the room, they also found some nice little goodies. But that was one ongoing conflict between all of that. Ended up taking about 2 hours of fighting, 2.5 of just pure concentrated fighting with all the various members of the Butcher family, a large portion of the night. So they've searched a few of the rooms. There's still several rooms that need to be searched in this house. They also found a hatch leading up to the attic. So there's that. They also found a secret door leading out into the stable from Granny's room. She did not run away. She stayed to defend the family. Even when the family didn't all rush in to help her, just Jeb and Eustace, but still, she fought to the end. She could have possibly escaped. And that's where we left off. So when the next starts, we'll still be in the Butcher's home and figuring out which way the group wants to go. Again, not really having time to take rests or anything, and I believe most of them have used up their hit dice from their short rests they've taken prior. So all there is left is to move forward. One thing that might help is they did find a potion of energy, which can restore used spell slots, and Vanessa has it as their healer, so if anybody gets mangled, she might be able to heal them quickly. Other than that, though, the group is... Well, they know they're in a nasty spot. They know that the Butchers have been fighting pretty dirty, and they're pretty horrible-looking folk. But moving forward, they're ready to see this through. So we'll see what happens next time in the next State of the Dungeon Address. Thank you, and farewell.